Welcome to TEPSA Talk, the podcast where leaders inspire, share, and grow together. TEPSA is dedicated to celebrating the incredible work happening in education. Each episode, we dive into meaningful conversations with leaders, change-makers, and innovators who are shaping the future of our schools. Whether you're looking for fresh ideas, encouragement, or a little spark to fuel your passion, TEPSA Talk is here for you. Imagine tuning in to hear how leaders are revolutionizing their schools, tackling challenges head-on, and fostering a culture of collaboration. Grab a coffee, hit play, and let's grow together. Welcome to TEPSA Talk.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to an all-new episode of our TEPSA Talk podcast. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. We are thrilled every week to bring you thought leaders from around the world, and today is two of my personal favorites, just all-around amazing human beings, brilliant at what they do, and I can't wait for you all to learn from them in this conversation today. And we have Joshua Stamper and Charle Peck on with us today. And so, guys, in case they don't know who you are, aren't connected with you in some capacity, introduce yourselves. Charle, go first.
Oh my gosh, you directed us. Okay, nice. Hi. All right, I'm Charle Peck. I am a former educator, K through 12. And then I ended up teaching high school for 18 years, but I have a background in child development. And so my students were just struggling so much, so I didn't know how to help them. And long story short, after a lot of different kinds of paths, I ended up becoming a clinical therapist. So I am a school-based therapist a couple of times a week and also a school mental health consultant working around the globe, really, to just help schools improve their system for kids. That's the gist.
That's awesome. All right. So my name is Joshua Stamper, and I used to be in Texas, a Texas administrator, and had been a part of TEPSA for 5+ years and just love everything that organization is doing. And Todd, I'm just so thrilled to join you and have that opportunity with Charle to talk about our new book. But as far as my background, I took a very unique pathway or journey. I was an art teacher to start off with and did that for 6 years. My third year as an art teacher, I switched over and became a coach, an athletic coach. So that in itself was odd. I know a lot of people gave me kind of those like weird stares as an art teacher and coach. That's interesting. And then I got a tap on the shoulder from an administrator, one of my assistant principals, to say, hey, you're making such an impact as a coach with, outside of your own classroom. Have you ever thought about a principal? And I laughed, actually, because one, I was just trying to get some coffee in the morning, but two, I had never, ever thought about leadership. I just started to feel comfortable in my own skin as a teacher and now as a coach. And so I did a lot of thinking about that and then, jumped into the master's program and thankfully got promoted first as a dean of students and then as an assistant principal, and did that for almost a decade. And then transitioned to the Teach Better team I kind of moved up eventually to the director of innovation. And then this past year here, I've kind of gone on my own and now I've worked with Charle and doing consulting, speaking, podcasting, and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, just super excited to be here and now to work with the amazing Charle Peck.
Love it. Love it. Well, I'm big fans of both of you. I love your books, whether that's Aspire to Lead, your first one, Josh, or School Mental Health, your first one, Charle. But I got to say, I love your original books, but the title of this topic today and the title of your brand new book is The Language of Behavior. And as we know, any of us that are doing any kind of work in education right now, behavior is at the top of everyone's list in some capacity, no matter what role, and even many of us at home dealing with our own children, behavior is on that list. And so when I was able to read this book the first time, there was just so much goodness in it that I knew we had to have you guys on for this conversation today. And so, Charle, I wanted to talk with you a little bit. At some point, this became important for you to be putting together this kind of manuscript to help people understand the language of behavior. I think it's the perfect segue from your first book, because obviously the school mental health, a lot of that plays into behavior and things like that. But when did you feel the urge and the want to kind of dive into this kind of material?
Yeah, it's interesting you put it that way too, because the first book is about 9 essential skills that we can equip teachers with, essentially, and leaders with, actually. And I was just so excited about that because we needed something tangible for educators to do. And I was like sitting in these therapy sessions with people and kids and some adults who were really struggling. And I thought, why did it take me becoming a therapist to learn these skills that we could be teaching teachers on a basic level? Come on. And so that's how that came about. And then I did notice that when I went into schools and districts and started working with educators and leaders, something was missing. There was a framework of how to do that, how to roll it out on a bigger scale. So it was interesting. Josh came to me and said, hey, I've got this idea and I've been working on this and I'd love to have your lens. And it just made so much sense. And now, and Josh will say a little bit more about this probably, is that now we have a plan to give leaders. It really is like a simple framework. It's only 3 tenets. I mean, it's something that we can do. But what I love about this too, is it helps explain the underlying reasons why kids are doing what they're doing that's causing so much stress for educators in the first place. So it helps with the buy-in of actually learning and acquiring skills in the first place.
You know, you brought up something really great, Josh. A lot of your work lately has been in the trauma area of things, dealing with kids dealing with trauma and having to work through that and deal with that. And so I love that this was like a natural segue for you too into having this in here, which is why I'm so glad both of you partnered up, because you cover such really 2 cool perspectives that I think make this book so special. So when did this become something you were like, I got to get this out there? We need to help our people.
Well, I mean, when Todd, you and I connected, I mean, we're both administrators in schools, and I've shared with you in the past just sort of my frustration as becoming an administrator and the tool belt and kind of the expectations that people put on you is like, when working with students, you have to give them detention, ISS, OSS, or special programs. Like those are your tools. And like they expect, like if the kid is not behaving, that you're going to get rid of them or put them somewhere else. And then this magically their behavior is going to improve to then go back into the educational environment. And as we know, that's not the case. And there's a lot of hostility and animosity that's built up over time. There's broken relationships throughout the school. And then as the year goes on, it just gets deeper and deeper to the level where it can't even be fixed between the teacher and the student. And so for me, I was frustrated for quite some time. The title and what really originated was 6 years ago. My wife and I actually created a blog with this title, The Language of Behavior. And she kind of took a parent perspective. I took the administrator perspective, and kind of really, it was a journey that both of us were feeling because we were foster parents. We had fostered for 12 years. 4 of my children are adopted from foster care, and the foster training that was going through our journey there, because you get a lot of training as a foster parent each year, it was very, very different than what I was taught, both as a teacher, a coach, and administrator. And so I was looking at this like, okay, I'm seeing all these behaviors that are exactly what we're seeing on the campus. However, the strategies being used over here are much more about the relationship with the child and making sure that, there's ownership and teaching and looking at their emotional well-being, where over here is purely just punishment. And that just didn't connect with me. And so for looking at the data and then, my frustration, I was like, well, why don't we just try something else? Because obviously what we're doing is not working. So can we please, try and transition over to something that's a little bit more alternative and more about the student and the trauma informed component. And so with that, I found success, and that's really where it originated. I always knew I wanted to write a book, but at the same point, I just didn't feel like I wanted just my perspective, my lens. And that's where Charle came in with just, I can't speak highly enough about Charle and her perspective, but it was perfect. It just worked as far as our 2 voices, our 2 experiences, and putting those together to create this framework.
Well, having co-written several books myself with people, what I love when I get to talk with my co-author to other people is how differently our perspectives are on the end result, and how each one of us have very different, like, really impactful moments from the book, or things that we hear from people that we talk to that sticks out to them. And so, Charle, I'd love to know, after now having this language of behavior out and connecting with administrators and educators and everything like that, if you were to say, okay, this is my number 1 takeaway from the book, what would you say is like your favorite part of the book, or your number 1 takeaway for others?
That is so easy, because I learned this from Josh in the work that he did, which is so critical, is the relationship action team is what he formed. That was the alternative approach he took. And so how many buildings have people who are just dying to do something different and they don't know what to do? And so if you form this team and you learn how to implement the tenets and you learn how to communicate with each other and use data in a way that doesn't suck, really, in a way that is appropriate, but also like gets people excited and inspired, that's what this team does. So that's why I'm excited for what Josh brought in, because he helped kind of design how that would be, what that would be like. And that is what makes an impact, is when we do this collectively.
Well, and I love what you shared at the beginning of this conversation. Was one of the biggest takeaways for me in this book is how easily implementable it is, how it's not an overwhelming system, how it's not super confusing. And sometimes I can read a really great book and think, I don't even know where to start. Like, there's so many pieces of this, I don't even know where to dive in. And so that's what I love about this whole idea of the language of behavior book. And so, Joshua, I'd love to ask the same question for you, though. Knowing that you also are talking a lot about this book, you're connecting with people from all walks of life in the educational spectrum. What do you feel like is the part that you are like, oh yeah, this is the biggest takeaway, or this is my favorite part of the book?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, Todd, is just like, because when you construct something, obviously in your mind, you want to make sure that people read it and then there's an actual step that goes with it, right? I can think of so many books I've read, and kind of what you were talking about is it's more like a higher theory piece, and then you're trying to like fit that theory into your own world, and it's really abstract, and it's really hard to make that connection. And for Charlie and I, and this is what we're hearing from folks too that have read it, is just like, I feel like I can just implement this right away. Like tomorrow when I go back into the classroom, I can take, strategy A, B, or C, like if it's a check-in or a relationship inventory or a relationship treatment agreement, like whatever the strategy might be, that it's something that they can just like go in right away and try it out. And that was the idea behind it. And the 3 tenets too, like we wanted to minimize it. We didn't want, 10, 20 steps for administrators to try to implement this onto the campus, because, for myself as administrator, I know how hard it is to get anything going on your campus. And, some people have equated it to like driving a cruise ship versus a speedboat. Mm-hmm. I would love to drive the speedboat, but as we know, as a campus and having, 100 staff members, it's just really hard to do. And so we wanted to try and minimize that. So, Charlie did a fantastic job, and she's brilliant at this, of just kind of like really minimizing it to make it just stick and make it as simple as possible. And so for our 3 tenets, we've got consider your environment, exploring the breakdown, and then responding intentionally. And those 3 tenets, I think people are going to see it, understand it right away, and then be feeling confident to implement that, because it's so easy and simple to do the next day.
Well, that leads so great into my next question. And for you, Charlie, I'd love to know, one of the biggest things I hear from administrators, especially here in the state of Texas, is I'm so overwhelmed. Like, in addition to behavior, there's all these other things happening right now, but behavior is a big issue. And Todd, I don't even know like where to begin, because it's all over the spectrum. And I'm so nervous that trying something new is going to break my people, because it feels like all we do is try and try and try. And so for that administrator who is feeling at their breaking point when it comes to something like this, what's some advice that you have for them?
Start with one darn thing. I mean, I always say, what is it that's just keeping you up at night? What is it that's bothering you? And then just try to address that. And again, this is the language of behavior. So what's underlying that behavior that's showing up in your school? What's the common behavior? What are you hearing staff say over and over? So you're not going to take away everybody's overwhelm, but I think we can just equip people. And so that's one of the things we talked about in the book, is every chapter has to have something that's actionable. And so at the end of every chapter, it truly is something that, okay, we talked about this stuff, but here's what you can do. So it depends on what it is. And we start with consider your environment, because we have control a lot, not all the time, over our environment. And so what can we do if they're showing up to our office, whether it's a parent, staff member, or a kid? So what can you do within that environment? So we keep it really simple, but the steps are there. So I always say, listen, just choose the very first thing that's bothering you, keeping you up, and just address that, looking at that underlying need. That's why we give a lot of these little graphics in there that keeps it so simple. Yeah. But here's what I will finally say here. Manage your own your needs. Make yourself find your sense of calm, because it's the only way that you're going to function well.
Well, and Josh, developing that a little bit more, I'd love to know from your perspective, as so often we hear from teachers that the administrator did not deal with the discipline, or did not deal with it in the way that I feel like it should have been dealt with. And so what advice do you have for administrators today to alleviate that from happening, to know that your teachers are talking about the way you deal with students. And
For
so
sure.
being careful with how we deal with it, but dealing with it in a way that truly is what's best for the kid. Even if
Yeah.
the other adult doesn't agree with the choice, sometimes you're going to make a decision that the teacher is not going to agree with, but it's what's best for the kid.
For
So
sure.
what advice do you have for administrators to be brave in making that decision?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go with the quote that we have in the book, because I think this is going to set up kind of where I want to go with this question. And I think it's a brilliant question. So this is from Dr. Dan Siegel, and it says, too often we forget that discipline really means to teach, not to punish. A disciple is a student, not a recipient of behavioral consequences. And I think this is where we get this miscommunication and this just warped idea of what discipline really should be about. Now, we talk about, kids need to go in, they need to master the objectives and the standards, and it's about learning. Well, yes, it's learning about science and math and all those other things, but it's also about learning about how to become a human being, how to make the correct choices, how to build relationships, healthy relationships, and then also how to go through adverse situations. Are we emotionally regulated, and how do we do that? And so we have these really high standards for our kids, and a lot of times they don't even have the skills. They don't possess the skills to be successful in regards to student behavior. And so if we have this lens as an administrator to teach the correct behavior, then I'm hoping that Charlie and I in our book are giving you the permission to do something different. And there's a lot of examples in there, specifically, for mine, the administrative lens of like, what does that look like as an alternative?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't always have to be ISS. So I'm going to give you a real quick story, Todd. So I had a student go into a book fair. He took a book, threw it in his jacket, and walked out. Well, the librarian saw that he did that. He wasn't very slick, but she went after him and brought him to the front office. Now, if I was to just use the discipline matrix or what I had done traditionally, I would have thrown him in ISS for multiple days, right, for stealing the book. But instead, I was like, okay, what can I do to teach the student to make sure that he understands what's going on? Obviously, he's affected someone or multiple people based on his decision. So I had a conversation with the librarian, the child, and myself to understand what was going on behind it. He had money. In fact, his mother right away was like, I don't understand why he stole the book. We have money. It wasn't about the money. He was just trying to show off to his friends, right? That's the deeper level behind the behavior, right? That's the language. And so in that, how can I teach you to do the appropriate thing? So we got down to, okay, who does it affect, right? It affected the librarian, it affected her funds. It affects, the people around you. You're giving a negative perception. And then working with the student to say, okay, what can we do to rectify this, to restore what was broken, right? There's a broken relationship between you and the librarian. So he decided, I want to come in before school for 2 weeks and help the librarian. He felt really, really bad about his decision. Okay, sure. And in my thinking, that's actually probably more time that he's serving, and it's inconvenient and it's a consequence. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, to the staff, when they see that he's not in ISS, what's the perception? He got off scot-free. Administrator's not doing anything. We all know he stole a book, right? Yeah. But then it's that communication piece of like, no, what does consequence mean, right? He did receive a consequence. And so let's talk about the benefit on that. On the other end of it, that student came in every day. He helped the librarian. He made sure other kids didn't steal. He was making a good influence, but then also he helped the librarian and got a deep relationship with her, to the sense that after the 2 weeks were up, he actually volunteered his time during his lunch and before school to come in and help her, because he had established such a great relationship. Well, none of those things would have happened if I would have just chucked him in ISS for a couple of days and then him going back. Now, the teachers may have been happy because they got to see firsthand that he got a consequence, but that's not teaching the correct behavior. And did that ever happen again through his entire career in middle school? No, he never stole again. So the behavior stopped. He learned something, and he got a restorative piece there with the librarian and a deeper relationship with her. And so for me, I'm saying, okay, that's a better result. That's what I want. It did take more time, yes, but it's about teaching the correct behavior, not about just the punishment.
Well, and I think what's so important too is that reminder that every kid is different. And that reminder that if you just have a blanket consequence, there are some kids whose behavior is just to get the consequence. Like there are some kids who are like, yeah, put me in ISS. I love it. That's where I want to be. Whereas in, like you said, you dealt with the underlying issue, which alleviated it from happening again. And so I love that. And so Charlie, if our listeners today are going, okay, I get all this, but like, just give me one takeaway. Like, what is your biggest takeaway you want people to hear today from this conversation? Like, if they walk away with nothing else, what's your number one thing?
I will always say, just if you come from a place of curiosity and calm, it's so hard to say and do sometimes. But if you really do that and you just ask the kid, hey, what's going on? Like, what's this really about? Instead of being reactive, it is so important how that kid is going to show up to you. So you just said before, like those kids, okay, they might want to go into that ISS classroom. Well, why? Why do they want to be there, not in your class? And so we're not ever telling teachers you're doing a terrible job. What we're saying is let's just kind of pull back a little bit and say, hey, what's really going on here? Yeah. Teach them to do that. And really, sometimes that's just basic skills and just being able to shift perspective. Sometimes leadership needs to give them permission to do that too, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said there. I have to jump in real quick. I just saw this thing a couple weeks ago that we've kind of been trying in our own household. We've got 3.5-year-old twin boys, and sometimes they can be snappy and they can say something and they're all learning their emotions and everything like this. But I saw this really great thing online that we've been trying recently is that when a kid is rude or snaps at you or anything like that, we don't just initially go, you don't talk to me like that, or you don't do this or that. The first response is, who are you talking to? And they'll be like, well, I'm talking to you. No, who are you talking to? And having that moment to go, well, I'm talking to daddy or I'm talking to mommy. Well, that humanizes it a little bit. And it kind of changes the whole perspective of, okay, how do we talk to mommy or daddy? Okay,
yeah.
Well,
and you gave them awareness too.
Exactly.
That's what you did. And it really is so neurological at that point. I mean, that's when you've captured them.
Well, and that's, I think, where it goes into what you said so much of our reactions play into their behavior. And so though it's not easy, which I'm so glad you said that, because it is not easy when you know they knew better or know that what they did, they shouldn't have done. But I love that you shared that. So thank you. Josh, your one takeaway for our listeners.
Well, it kind of goes right in line with what you just said, which was the connection before correction. Right? If we really want to transform student behavior, the key to that is deep and meaningful relationships and making sure that we're modeling what that looks like. Because we can't, like what I said before, we can't assume that they have this at home and that they've experienced this. And so, even with communication, and this is something that we talk about in the book too, is like, just being mindful of that. Are we standing over them? What is our tone of voice like? The volume of our voice? Are we amongst other people that are witnessing the conversation, or are we one-on-one? So there's a lot of things that we can think about. And that's kind of like consider your environment. It's also consider your communication and how you're modeling the appropriate things that you want. And that's right in line with what you're talking about as parenting, and that's the same thing at home. And so for anyone that's listening, like that's something we have control over, and we can make sure that we're being a window, not a mirror. If our kids are being escalated behaviors and maybe they're not showing the perfect way of communication, we're not reciprocating in that. We're actually doing the opposite and showing them, what we expect moving forward and for them to be successful in life, but because communication is such a huge thing.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I hope our listeners and viewers go and check out your brand new book, The Language of Behavior. Joshua also has written Aspire to Lead, and Charlie has also written School Mental Health. And so, Charlie, if people want to connect with you further and they want to get some more resources or ideas, how can they find and connect with you?
They can just go to thrivingeducator.org. Nice and easy.
Love it. Thrivingeducator.org. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, my website's joshsamper.com. And then, all my socials are on there, so they can find me by clicking the various buttons there.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of our TEPSA Talk podcast. We hope you join us again next week with another all